Hello. Today I'm going to talk about Infinispan's Redis connector capabilities. Just like Redis, Infinispan is a key value store and in-memory cache, if you want, with additional capabilities. One of the abilities of Infinispan is that it can support multiple protocols from a single port. Started with Infinispan 14 last year, we added the ability to understand the Redis protocol called RESP, and initially we added support for some very basic commands, mostly related to string data types like get and set. But in Infinispan 15 we have expanded that support to many more commands and data types. To kick things off, I'm going to start Infinispan using a Docker container. By specifying a user and a password, and it will soon be ready. And as you can see here, Infinispan supports multiple connectors. It supports Hot Rod, which is our native protocol, and it supports REST, which is our HTTP protocol, the Redis protocol, also known as RESP, and the Memcached protocol. This is all done through a single port. I will now connect to this Infinispan instance by using my browser, using the 11222 port. It asks me to authenticate, and I will use the credentials I passed to the Docker container. And then I can open the console. The first view I see in the console are the caches that are available. Here I see that there's a cache for Memcached and a Redis cache. The caches have a type, and they also show their health. If we have a look at the Redis cache, we can see its configuration, and we see we have the ability to see some of its metrics here. Infinispan can be clustered with multiple nodes, and this view here shows the nodes that are currently the members of this cluster. In this case, there's only a single node. And we can see the connected clients. In this case, just my browser. Right, now let's connect to this Infinispan instance using the Redis CLI. So we have to specify the address of my Docker container and the port, which is obviously non-standard for the Redis CLI. We need to authenticate. And now we're in. So to begin with, let's start with the basics. So the set and get commands. So let's set a K1 key with a V1 value, and we can retrieve it just like this. We can also list all the available keys in the cache. Right, so very simple. In order to demonstrate all the new commands that we support in Infinispan 15, however, I will use the Redis GUI called RedisInsight. So let's add the connection details. My host, my port, let's give it a name, Infinispan, and the credentials. And let's add it. Right, so the first thing I see is that the key that I created through the CLI is available here. It tells me it's an immortal key, so it has no expiration. And everything is good. Now let's add a second key, because I want to show this key as it expires. So let's give it a time to live of 5 seconds. So we have the key. So if we refresh, we're still within the 5 seconds, though it still shows. And refresh again, and the key has disappeared as expected. I said that we now support all the various types in Redis core. So let's start creating a hash. Let's create a user object, user1. And this object has two properties. The first one is the name, John. let's give it a surname as well. So let's add the key. We support lists as well. So let's create a list of fruits. First fruit I want in here is a banana. There it is. Now I want to add an orange, and I want to add it at the tail of the list. And I want to add a watermelon, and I want to put it at the head of the list. So here we go. Very basic. Let's now add a sorted set. So let's call my sorted set objects, and this sorted set contains a light object and it has a score of 1. Let me add a heavy object which has a score of 10, and a very light object called a feather which has a score of 0.1. As you can see, the objects are sorted by score. Sorted sets obviously have a number of additional interesting capabilities. For example, I can increment the weight of one of the keys. So the key is objects. I want to increment the weight of the heavy object by 10. And as you can see, value has been incremented to 20. If I refresh this, it shows the value. Under the hood, obviously the GUI is performing lots of different commands. So for example, the ability to filter here uses the different types of scan filters by type. I can also filter by key match. Okay, so far so good. We've shown you the basics. Now let's make things interesting by starting a second Infinispan node. And we will call it ISPN2. Now, because the two containers are running the same Docker network, they will discover each other and cluster together. Once this has happened, the data will be present on both nodes. We are storing the Redis data in what's called an Infinispan distributed cache. A distributed cache has a number of owners, so the number of copies or replicas of the data you want. And now, because the default number of owners is 2, both nodes will store data. However, one interesting aspect of Infinispan is that even if you perform a request on a node that does not own the data, it will still happen. The request will be forwarded in the background from server to server to retrieve the element you want. Now, let's quit the Redis CLI I have here, and let's connect to the second node to prove that the data has successfully replicated. Sorry, I need to authenticate first. And now, by using scan command, I can see that I have all of my objects here. So, for example, let me do an hgetAll of the user to show that all the properties are there. Now, if I make a modification to an object on the other node of the cluster, for example, let's remove the surname from our user1 object. So user1 surname. And then I retrieve all the properties. Obviously, this is what I can see on the second node. Let's go back to RedisInsight, which is still connected to the first node. Let me clear the list. Let's look at the user, and I see that it has removed the property also from the first node. One great thing about Infinispan's multi-connector ability is the fact that we have some interoperability between the protocols. So you can retrieve the data using different protocols. So here I'm using the Infinispan CLI. I will connect to the first node in this case. It asks me to authenticate. Now, if I inspect the cache, I can find the objects, and if I get my K1 key, I see that it contains V1. This is using the HTTP interface. The same will happen if you use a Memcached client or the Hot Rod client. Why would you want to use Infinispan instead of Redis? Well, first of all, I've shown you that clustering in Infinispan is much simpler. There's no distinction between masters and replicas and shards in cluster mode and so on. So all the nodes are equivalent in Infinispan, and if you want to scale up or down, just add more nodes. Infinispan is multi-threaded, whereas Redis is single-threaded, so it means that a single node can handle much more load. It has different persistent options. So in this case, the Redis cache is a volatile cache. If we completely terminate all the nodes, we will lose all the data. Infinispan has a file system-based persistent backend, but it can also connect to other backends, such as databases. And you can also use it as an inline cache, for example, to cache a database table without having to implement any code to retrieve the data from the database. Infinispan supports cross-site replication, which means that you can have clusters of Infinispan on multiple sites, not just 2 sites, you can have more than 2 sites, and they will replicate between each other and maintain copies of the data on all your sites. So you can do geographical failover or active-active replication. One key difference of our implementation of the Redis protocol is that Infinispan supports multiple caches in the same container, just like Infinispan and just like Redis supports multiple databases. However, Redis has the limitation that multiple databases don't work in cluster mode. There's no such limitation in Infinispan even when using the Redis protocol, so you can switch databases. Infinispan implements real transactions, and these transactions can span multiple nodes. So Redis has batches, but batches in cluster mode are limited to the data that is stored on that node, on the shard. In Infinispan, you can initiate a transaction, including data from different nodes in this transaction, and it will support commit and rollback using proper transaction semantics. Infinispan also comes with a fully featured Kubernetes operator. This operator supports provision of nodes, so scaling up and down is extremely simple in this mode. And it automatically connects to Prometheus for exporting metrics, and it comes with Grafana dashboards, and it automatically can perform backup and restore of your data and configure more complex things like cross-site. Infinispan security is also very advanced. Here I showed how to use a statically defined user and password, but you can connect Infinispan to an LDAP server, for example, or using client certificates for authentication, or even Kerberos. So if you want to learn more about Infinispan and why it's a good choice for replacing your Redis usage, head over to the Infinispan website at infinispan.org. There you will find ways to contact the community. So our chat, our GitHub discussion, see the code, download the container images, and so on. So please let us know what you think. Reach out. Thank you very much for listening.